So in the last video, we were talking about the Turkish titan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Prime Minister, now President of Turkey. And Turkey itself kind of spans regions and continents in a sense. Is it mostly a European state, or is it more of a Middle Eastern state? Most people put it in the Middle East. Increasingly, a lot of us put it also in Europe, because it is the bridge between the two regions, and Turkey plays a role in both regions, and Turkey's President Erdogan plays a huge role both in what's going on with immigration into Europe, and possibly Turkey becoming a European Union member, but also in a lot of Middle Eastern affairs. A conflict happening in Syria. And as I suggested, Erdogan is a huge factor that influences other states across the Middle East, and he's quite popular. So let's transition into the next region / continent, staying with Erdogan and his local vicinity for a moment. Let's get to the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa regions. It's a couple of distinct world regions, or an expanded continent, whichever one you prefer. Now, as I said, Erdogan and Turkey span kind of both of these areas, so let's talk about him for a minute more. I suggested that Erdogan's Turkey is warming ties with Russia. It does appear that they are starting to pivot towards the east a bit more than they have in the past. Again, Turkey has mostly for the last 50 years been a U.S. ally, a NATO member, and looking to join the European Union. That may be changing. So warming ties with Russia, and just in the last few months, warming ties with Israel. What? In the past, Recep Erdogan has been very confrontational with Israel over the whole Palestinian statehood issue. He's been a big defender of the rights of Palestinians. It's one of the reasons why he's admired, not just in Palestine, but across the greater Middle East, as standing up to Israel, possibly even standing up to the United States on this particular issue. And Erdogan is also quite adamant about standing up to one President Bashar al-Assad, the leader of Syria, calling for him to be overthrown outright. And, in fact, Turkey is now working with the United States right this second in September 2016 on active military operations inside of Syria to oust this group called ISIS. But make no bones about it, Turkey would also like to oust the leadership of Syria. So Turkey's playing a big role in all directions around it. Erdogan, however, though, has made nicey-nice with Israel just in the last couple months, too. It's been an active 2016 for Erdogan and Turkey. So let's now leave Turkey and talk about the other folks who are the peeps that I'm referring to that he either hates and wants to overthrow, is warming up to. Let's start with the kind of outlier in the Middle Eastern region, and that is Israel. It's in the heart of it, but it's an outlier for virtually all cultural, religious, and confrontational issues you can think of. The leader of Israel right this second, his name is Prime Minister Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a big word. I like Bibi, that's his nickname. I guess it's Yiddish for Benjamin, I don't know. The thing you need to understand about Bibi right off the bat is that he is what we would call right-wing. A little further right than center-right. Some would say a lot further right. I'm not willing to go quite that far. He is what we would call a hawkish politician, hawkish leader to be sure. That is, he does not mind confrontation and relies on the military and being more active to solve problems of their borders or anything else going on within Israel or with Israel's neighbors. So, tough guy, if you want to look at it that way, and prone to using force to solve situations. Huge U.S. ally as well. Israel, much the same way I talked about the special relationship between Great Britain and the United States, Israel has a pretty special relationship too. The United States and Israel are pretty tight. Again, I'm hoping most of you know this already, maybe inherently. Maybe you don't, that's cool, know it now. The U.S. is one of the biggest supporters of Israel. The United Kingdom is a really big supporter as well. But Israel has, for most of its modern history, not been particularly popular in its own neighborhood. In fact, it's fought multiple wars with all of its neighbors. Some would say it is still fighting some wars with some of its neighbors. It may be getting involved in the Syria conflict now too, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. Even though the leaders of these two states, Israel and the United States, actually don't like each other right this second. Benjamin Netanyahu, no fan of President Obama, and vice versa. But the countries are historic allies, and they will weather through personal squabbles between the leaders of the state, no matter who they are. Now, why is it that Benjamin Netanyahu would not like President Obama? For virtually the entire 8 years Obama's been in office, they have had icy relations that have gotten worse, even though they're historic allies. Well, the Obama administration keeps bringing up these pesky little details about that whole two-state solution, about Israel should recognize Palestine as a separate state and let them have their whole statehood. And Benjamin Netanyahu actually has actively worked against that. Please, no hate mail. I'm just telling you who the guy is and his character and what he's all about. And on top of that, the Obama administration has recently signed a nuclear agreement deal with Iran. Maybe you've heard of that in 2016 as well. And the U.S. is warming relations with Iran, a historic enemy of the United States, and currently an enemy of Israel. So Israel, Bibi, for both of those reasons, has been at arm's length away from the Obama administration the whole time. Because Benjamin Netanyahu really hates Iran. He thinks they're the #1 threat to Israel. He's concerned about all the other neighbors as well, but really aggressive towards Iran. He's actually been fairly aggressive towards the creation of the Palestinian state. I referenced that already. Having said all of that, even though these two guys don't like each other, here in September 2016, the United States Today released a press statement saying that the United States is going to pledge $38 billion to Israel, which makes it the largest military/foreign aid package to another country in the history of the United States. Possibly in the history of the world. I don't know. I don't know my history that well. That's what I mean, though, in terms of these are two tight allies, regardless of the personal differences that the leaders have. So Obama, on his way out of office, is giving the signal to Israel, yes, we've had issues in the past, me and you, but our states are still tight. And Benjamin Netanyahu, for his part, has said, yes, well, I don't like you personally, but we'll take that money because we don't want to wait for the U.S. election to see who's in charge, because maybe they won't give us as much. Okay? So that's Israel, hawkish, center right to further right, Benjamin Netanyahu. And I referenced that Erdogan of Turkey had recently warmed back up to him. That also has happened this year. Erdogan has stood up for Palestinian rights, and actually they broke diplomatic relations with Israel a couple years ago over a big fracas that I won't go into details here. But just in the last couple months, they've said, you know what, we need to work together on more regional issues, including this Syria mess. So relationships restored, and Erdogan is warming back up to Bibi, and vice versa. So interesting things afoot. Again, I don't keep meaning to bring it back to Turkey, but let's stay with it for one more second, because who did I say Erdogan really hates in his neighborhood and wants to overthrow? And that would be one President Bashar al-Assad, the leader slash right-wing leader slash dictator slash kind of monarch of Syria, a place that I am certain you have heard about in current events, because it's been in a state of civil war for going on 5 years, hundreds of thousands of dead, hundreds of thousands of people that have fled, causing the migrant crisis in Europe and other parts of the Middle East. That's often forgotten that while lots of folks have gone to Europe to escape the Syrian civil war fighting, even more of them have gone to the neighboring states of Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey. Sorry, I digress when I'm supposed to be talking about these leaders. So who is this dude who has caused this whole civil war? Bashar al-Assad, he took over Syria from his daddy. That's why I said it's kind of a monarchy. They don't call themselves kings, but if Junior takes over from daddy, and they rule with an iron fist, and there's not really elections, and even if they are, they're stacked, and even if they are stacked, it's only one person on the ballot, so that's kind of a one-party state monarchy. It's hard to define this, but we can just call it a straight-up dictatorship if you like to, because the Assad regime has refused to concede power all throughout this civil war, which now involves so many parties, I can't even keep count of it anymore. And other people from not even within Syria, namely the United States is fighting there, Russia's fighting there, Turkey's fighting there now, Iran has sent in people, but that mess is a totally different lecture in and of itself. I'm getting ahead of the whole Middle Eastern story here. Let's back it up and look at the major teams and the leaders of these teams vying for power and influence across the Middle East, because you might say, what's Turkey got against, what has Recep Erdogan got against Bashar al-Assad and his allies? Well, now we have to start learning a few more things about the people themselves for you to understand current events. And President Assad is an Arab dude, ethnically Arab, and he is also religiously a Shia, from the Shiite Islam side of things. In Islam, there are two major branches: Sunni, which is the majority of planet Earth. If you're Islamic, mostly on planet Earth, you're of the Sunni classification, but there's a minority that are Shia. Assad and his regime are of the Shia flavor. Okay, that's one big difference for you to think about. And they subsequently have as one of their strongest allies Iran, where most Shia people are. But again, now I'm starting to tell too many details, so just keep those details in your mind about Assad as we back it up and say, okay, what are the bigger teams? What are the big differences within the Middle East that help define these leaders and why some of them hate each other? Assad is the trickiest one because he's on multiple teams and hated by all. So if we're going to talk about big differences ethnically and religiously across the Middle East, here's some easy ones. Bibi is Jewish, okay? Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, the Jewish state of Israel, he's Jewish, got that. Recep Erdogan of Turkey, he's Turkish. Ethnically, he's Turkish, not Arab. And he is Islamic, Sunni Islamic. Oh, okay, already. All right, okay. So Erdogan is Turkish, he's not on Team Arab, and he's Sunni, so he's not on Team Shia. And Assad is ethnically Arab and religiously Shia. We'll stick with the Arab part for just a second more, because Team Arab is kind of the biggest team population-wise, a number of countries across the greater Middle East. What other leaders across the Middle East would we put in the Arab category? They're mostly comprised ethnically Arab peoples in Arab states. That's easy. It's pretty much everybody except Turkey and Iran when you're looking at the greater Middle East. So al-Assad of Syria, he's Arab. The Arab power players, actually, the most important Arab states, are not Syria. They're fringe. It's Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And so King Salman, you definitely must know who's the king of Saudi Arabia. Obviously, by saying he's a king, that means it's a monarchy. And King Salman is Salman, I guess it's pronounced like the fish, Salman, has only been in power for, gosh, just a couple years now. The former king died while in office, as kings are wont to do. They don't really retire. And King Salman of Saudi Arabia is one of the more important figures on planet Earth, not just because Saudi Arabia is a hugely rich oil state, and Saudi Arabia kind of controls OPEC. That's the biggest oil-producing grouping on planet Earth. They're important for that. They're also important because Saudi Arabia has historically been a U.S. ally. They're also important because Saudi Arabia controls the holiest sites of Islam, Mecca and Medina, where 1.5 billion followers of Islam on planet Earth consider a holy ground. So whoever's in charge of Saudi Arabia has a tall order. Not only are they kind of the epicenter of the Arab world, but they're the epicenter of the Islamic world. And the king, King Salman in this case, is routinely ranked as one of the top 10 most powerful people on planet Earth. Not just economically, but socially and culturally and religiously. It's kind of a big deal that you know who King Salman is. Now, Saudi Arabia is historically a huge ally of the United States. But just like Benjamin Netanyahu over in Israel, a historic ally of the United States, King Salman and the Obama administration have not seen eye to eye either, precisely because some things I've already mentioned. The U.S. warming up relations with Iran, that's been problematic for the king. The U.S. perhaps wanting to pull out of the Middle Eastern affairs. Typically the U.S. has not wanted to get involved in Syria and maybe moving forces away from the Middle East and over to East Asia. That's worried the king. So allies still, but a bit of friction between the world leaders right this second, between the King of Saudi Arabia and President Obama. Again, next president of the United States, who knows what the relationship will be, but they're still kind of historic allies nonetheless. The other major Arab power player is Egypt. And Egypt's the biggest Arab power player because it has the biggest Arab population. I want to say I'm ballparking like 80 or 85 million Egyptians. And Egypt is kind of a society that's been struggling. It was the epicenter of the Arab Spring. There's lots of unhappy people there. Economically, it's not been doing well. And they went through 3 decades of being under a kind of a dictator named Hosni Mubarak, kind of a one-party state is what we used to call them. And during the Arab Spring, which was an uprising, a protest to try to better the Arab situation, which is why it's called the Arab Spring, not the Middle Eastern Spring. It's the Arab country thing. So there was an uprising in Egypt. They overthrew the dictator who was in charge of their one-party state. His name was Hosni Mubarak, by the way, if you want to look him up. And then they elected a democratic government, and then there was another military coup that threw out the elected government, and now there's a new dictator in charge, / it's back to being a one-party state. Yes, all of that happened in the last couple years. So the guy you need to know right this second in Egypt is Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Sisi, it's easy to remember. Sisi? Who do I need to see in Egypt? Sisi, that's who. And he used to be a general in the army. Surprise, surprise. It was a military coup which overthrew the elected government, and he put himself in charge. And he said, well, I'm not in the military anymore. I'm just going to run for president, and let's have a fake election, and I'm the only one on the ballot, and I won, so now I'm the president. That's what we call a one-party state. So you're starting to see a trend here maybe already. I've only mentioned 3 leaders, and all of them are kind of what we call on the right side of the political spectrum. Not a lot of political opposition. None in Saudi Arabia. You're just the king. It's good to be the king. A dictator in Syria, a semi-dictator one-party state in Egypt. And again, that's the Arab kind of core. But if we looked across all of North Africa and the rest of kind of the classic Middle East, most of those states are predominantly ethnically Arab, and they have Arab leaders as well. I'll only mention a couple others. One is King Abdullah II, the president of Jordan, president/king. I'm not exactly sure how they call it. I know he is a king, so we're going to call them a monarchy as well. He's a little more liberal, though. He's trying to open up the political process a bit. I actually talked to him one time. Here's the link if you want to go see a personal message that he gave to our class at Virginia Tech. So he may be trying to open up the Jordanian system a bit, but then again, maybe not. He is a king. It is a monarchy. It is on the right side of the political spectrum, although he's personally probably a really nice guy. And another Arab leader that I do want you to know is Mahmoud Abbas. And Mahmoud Abbas is not even a head of a state. He is the leader, the head of Palestine. And you already know this, Palestine is actually not a sovereign state yet. But he has been kind of heading up the mission to have Palestine as a sovereign state for, I don't even know, 10, 20 years now. So when you see somebody from Palestine speaking at the United Nations as their head, that would be this guy, Mahmoud Abbas. On again, off again, trying to work with Israel to have a 2-state solution and become their own independent state, and off again, relations are off and everybody hates each other, and it's conflict time, which is what's been going on in Israel and Palestine for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years now. So when we look at all these leaders, with the exception of Abbas, politically and socially, they're on the conservative right side to far right side of the spectrum, sometimes really, really far. And this is true for virtually all Arab states across the Arab League. That's right, there's a political entity named the Arab League where all the Arab states get together in their own club to talk about problems and hash out issues and work together to make better Arab times. Hadn't worked out so well for 5 or 6 decades, but there's still an Arab League. So from Morocco through Algeria, Mauritania, all the way over to Oman and Yemen and Saudi Arabia, Iraq, not Iran. These are all states that are predominantly ethnically Arab, even one in Africa named Sudan. And the leaders of all these places are ethnically Arab and predominantly, overwhelmingly, they're also Sunni Islam. There are also some dead Arab leaders, dead Arab dudes of note that you may have heard of. One, Muammar Gaddafi, used to be the dictator of Libya, till he was thrown out of power and killed and dragged through the streets. Saddam Hussein, leader of Iraq, who was in power till he was kicked out of office and killed and dragged through the streets. And even one Osama bin Laden. He was Saudi-born before the U.S. got him and killed him and dragged him through the streets. Okay, no, that didn't happen. His body just disappeared. I saw Zero Dark 30. That shit was crazy. Okay, so the Arab League, Arab ethnicity predominates across North Africa and most of the Middle East. And I know this is a little confusing because you say, oh, I thought Egyptian people, or people in Egypt are Egyptian. They're not Arab. People in Morocco are Moroccan. They're not Arab. It's an ethnicity, okay? And it predominates across all of this area I've now mentioned. To say you're Egyptian means you are a citizen of Egypt. Egyptian is not a separate ethnic group anymore. Does that make sense? If not, hit me up. Okay, so I mentioned, back to the beginning of this story, I mentioned that Turkish President Recep Erdogan really hates Bashar al-Assad of Syria. But so do all the other Arab leaders I've mentioned as well. Almost all of them. And even leaders I haven't mentioned across the rest of the Arab world really don't like Assad either. Why do they hate their Arab brother so? Well, back to the religion thing, because he's a Shia and not a Sunni, and Sunni predominates in all the places that I've mentioned thus far. It's a religious difference, which means that different people have different allies based not solely on Arabness, but sometimes on religion. And that brings me back to reinforce what I said about the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. Him and his clan, his crew, and the government, the people that have run the state for decades, they are what we call Alawites, which is a sub-branch of Shia. So as their natural allies, they have another group that is mostly Shia, even though they're not ethnically Arab. And that would be Iran. Now, let's move teams. Let's get to the other non-Arab peeps in the Middle East. Erdogan you got. He's Turkish. He ain't Arab. But what about these two guys? Who of this titanic turbaned duo is really in charge, and what country are they in charge of? Okay, time's up. One of them is President Hassan Rouhani. President Rouhani. The other one is Ayatollah Khamenei. I think the actual pronunciation is probably like Khamenei, but pronounce it correctly if you want. I don't care, as long as you can spell it and you can recognize this guy. So Khamenei or Khamenei, the Ayatollah. Who's really in charge, a president or an Ayatollah? Well, when it comes to Iran, it's the Ayatollah Khamenei. And the Ayatollah is large and in charge of Iran because Iran is a theocracy, stuff you've probably already learned. Both of these gentlemen are ethnically Persian. Hey, that's a different team altogether there in the Middle East. And the Persians don't get along well with the Arabs and vice versa. So we have a major rift within the Middle East. And I want you to know just these main leaders of these main big groups, because they're the biggest power players. So when you think of Iran, think Persian, not Arab, and think Shia, not Sunni. It's another reason why Iran is so different from the rest of the Middle East. So both of these guys, the president and Ayatollah, they're Persians. They're Shias because Iran is actually the epicenter of Shiaism, and it has the most Shias on planet Earth are located in Iran. And both of them are super conservative. So on the right side of the political spectrum, even further right when it comes to things like social issues. Or individual human rights or things of that nature. So Iran is a pretty super conservative state. Why? Well, because it's a religious state. It is a full-on theocracy, self-admitted. They have a revolution. They overthrew the old system, which was a monarchy, and said, we want to make ourselves a religious state. Now, I know you're thinking, oh, wow, both of these guys are conservative. Surprise, surprise, of course they are. They're all right-wing nut conservatives because the whole country is a religious state. So everyone is like, oh, we're way out there in the fringe. Hang on there. Not everybody in Iran is super, super, super conservative. There's a strong undercurrent of liberalism in Iran, and there are lots of people in the center. Yes, they had a revolution to implement this system, but that was back in 1979. And there has been on again, off again movements. One of them was called the Green Movement last time it popped up. to liberalize Iran some, socially and economically, and to rejoin the rest of the world, because Iran has kind of isolated itself ever since its 1979 revolution. And at any given time, a more liberal person could become president of Iran. Take that with a grain of salt, because it is a theocracy. And for those that haven't watched the other videos yet, a theocracy in Iran's case is that, yes, they have a Congress. Let's just call it a Congress. They have elected representatives from across the country who represent the people. They have a presidential election every 4 years where they elect a president. It looks just like a democracy, except they have this veneer at the top of the entire system that is a group of religious clerics who have the final say on everything, and they have the ultimate real power. And it is the Ayatollah who heads up this team of clerics, and these are religious people, and they can implement a dress code for the country if they want. They are the ones that would decide if the country's going to go to war or not. If any law is passed by the Congress and even gets signed into law by the president of Iran, the Ayatollah can strike it down. He has ultimate veto power over everything going on in society. And he's a religious figure. He's the head of the religion of Iran. Thus, it's a theocracy, a religious state. And thus, yes, the Iranian people can go out and vote for a president, but it's a president that the clerical council has already cleared to run for president. So it's a bit of a stacked system. Yes, it's kind of democratic. And by the way, I believe more people turn out to vote in the Iranian elections than turn out to vote in the American elections. Kind of a sad fact. But the clerical council and the Ayatollah have final say on who can even run for president. So they're not going to let some crazy liberal lefty run. However, the society has been softening over time and loosening up a bit. And the current president, Hassan Rouhani, is a bit more of a moderate dude. Now, yes, you see him, he's got a turban on. You're like, well, isn't he an Ayatollah too? No, but he's a religious guy. I think he had religious training. But he is the almost secularly elected president, and he is more moderate. Yeah, of course, he's conservative on almost all issues. But he is the one that's saying, hey, let's pull our system back towards the middle a little bit. Let's open things up. And a lot has happened since Rouhani became president. Most important, that Iran has opened itself back up to the rest of the world by signing a nuclear deal with the United States that went through the United Nations that is allowing for inspectors to come in to see if Iran is indeed trying to produce nuclear weapons. And this is ending the embargo that the United States and most of the world have had against Iran since, I don't know, since the 70s, the 80s. So this is a really big turning point for Iran right this second. Yes, both of these guys are conservative, but that don't mean the system is entirely stagnant as it sounds. It ain't like a king is in charge, because no one's got a say in any of that. The people have a voice in Iran, and they're moving perhaps more towards the center, but anytime they want to, the Ayatollahs can reel it back in. Now, Ayatollahs of note in Iran, and there's only been two. Sorry for making you learn some dead guys along with the live leaders, but the Ayatollahs of rock and rollers that you need to know are the current one, Ayatollah Khamenei. I just say Khamenei. I sound ridiculous trying to say it right. Khamenei. Ayatollah Khamenei, currently in power for like 2 decades. He replaced the guy who oversaw the 1979 Islamic Revolution itself in Iran, and that guy was Ayatollah Khomeini. I know it's super confusing. It's basically the same word with an O instead of an A. And Ayatollah Khomeini was a real firebrand who led the revolution, who said, our country sucks because we have a king in charge and he's a puppet of the West. Let's overthrow him and become a proper Islamic republic. And he was a really good speaker, and people really liked him, and that's exactly what happened in Iran. Now, if you don't remember Ayatollah Khomeini, he was a kind of a scary-looking dude back in the 80s. A real firebrand. Really, the United States is the devil, and we need to defeat them, and they're horrible. And he was scary-looking in his own right. But if it helps you remember, here's an image to sear into your brain where he kind of looks like a Sean Connery. I don't know where these things come from. Thank you, students who send me these memes. Yeah, there's a pre-meme. That was before memes were even a thing. So, back to the Persian peeps. Those are the Persian peeps running the show in Iran today. Iran is a rising power in the Middle East. Not the least of which is because they're being reopened to the rest of the world. They are a significant oil producer that has not been producing nearly as much as they could. So they have I think they're second in line after Saudi Arabia for oil reserves. They're a really big country. They're a really literate country. They're actually, although they're super conservative, they're a bit more liberal on a lot of fronts than you might think, especially compared to the neighbors in the Middle East. So Iran is not a power player to be underestimated, so you should know the guys in charge of it. Now, again, here's what you need to know for right now. Hardcore right, especially their ruling system, theocracy, possibly they want nuclear weapons, although that's now being diffused, pun intended, because of the nuclear deal that's been signed with Western countries to allow for inspections. Iran has, for most of its modern history, been hated by the U.S. and vice versa. That may be changing. For all of its modern history, Iran has been hated by Israel. That's not changing, and they hate Israel right back. For most of its modern history, Iran has been hated by most Arab leaders. Not just because they're Shia and not Sunni, but also Arab leaders see Iran as an ultimate evil in the Middle East because they accuse Iran of exporting radical ideas like revolution and theocracy, and possibly even exporting weapons to people to fight for revolution and theocracy, or just to fight against Arab forces. Right this second, Iran is accused of supplying money, guns, weapons, and what have you to rebels in Yemen, rebels in Syria, and possibly even supporting street protests in other Arab states all over the place. So the Arab states, particularly Saudi Arabia, is like, oh, Iran, terrible, they're evil. And Iran says, yeah, you guys are losers. You have a king. You should be a theocracy, a real Islamic republic like us. Thus, the real friction across the Middle East. And I want you to understand it and relate it to the people in charge, because the people in charge make a big difference. Right this second, Hassan Rouhani, the president, is more liberal and opening up. I wouldn't call him a liberal, but more liberal than anybody else in power. Ayatollah Khamenei, for his part, still is a firebrand who says, no, the U.S. is evil, everything's terrible, but go ahead and soften things up, Rouhani. See how that dichotomy, that interplay works in the top halls of power in Iran? Relations are warming with the United States and the Western world. With that nuke deal, with the economic embargo being lifted, and Iran is actually even becoming a power player in terms of it may be at the negotiating table when they settle the Syrian civil war, since it supports Syria's Bashar al-Assad and has been sending in weapons for the government to fight back against ISIS and other groups. Got it? Okay? Iran is going to be a lot more important for the rest of your life than it has been up to this point in my life. It's a turning point type of thing. Know those leaders. But let's head out of the Middle East and into the rest of Africa.